Good evening. This is the Hingham Zoning Board of Appeals. It is June 5th, 2017. The time is 7:15. And this is a continuation hearing for Broadstone Bear Cove Alliance LLC, 230 Beal Street. That the public hearing for this matter closed on May 10th. So the purpose of this hearing is to afford board members the opportunity to deliberate and hopefully reach a resolution on the project. So that means that we are not at liberty to take comments from the public, to take comments from the applicant. We will be speaking among ourselves and with staff. And so I appreciate that the public is here, but we, as a matter of law, cannot accept comments, documents, or any further submissions. And I'll note that these proceedings are being recorded by the zoning administrator and also by HCAM. And with that, we begin our deliberations. We've had, Emily, how many hearings have we had on this? Do you know?
Good question.
It seems like
At least three.
At least three.
At least three.
I don't know. I'll try to tally them up.
Times three.
Yeah.
Actually, I can tell you pretty quickly. The town's website.
15, what do you think?
Quick is a relative term.
Yes. The number.
Just remember, we started in September
It was
of last year,
September
I believe.
15th.
Yeah.
Seems like it.
So September.
I think when these hearings started, all three board members had
Had hair.
fuller heads
Had
of
a
hair.
full head of hair,
than
yes,
what
exactly.
we have now.
Exactly.
Is it possible 17?
Yes, we estimated 15, so 17 seems right.
Time flies
So
when you're
we-
having fun.
We certainly had an opportunity to vet many issues, to hear from the applicant, to hear from the town's consultants, and to hear from members of the public, to do site visits. And I think we've had a good opportunity to consider the project. So what I would like to do first with the board members is to make sure that we are in agreement on the waivers.
Waiver list, right.
We've got the waiver list that the zoning administrator has prepared for us. And I believe this is consistent with what has been previously discussed at our prior meetings. Why don't we go through this? Local regulation, section 3A, schedule of uses, subsection 1.4, and all provisions, section 4E, multi-use development. The requirement is an apartment house if subject to the provisions of section 4E, multi-unit development, and is not allowed in an office park district, and was proposed is in fact to have a waiver so that the project, as shown on the revised plans, would be allowed. The second waiver is section 4A, dimensional requirements, the maximum building height of 35 feet, maximum floor area ratio of 0.14, and what we have in the proposed project, building 1 has a height at one point of 53.25 feet, and that's the parapet at the entry, 58 feet at the peak of the slope roof, and building 2 has a maximum height of 56.75 feet. That's the parapet at the entry, and 61.5 feet at the peak of the slope roof, and the floor area ratio, Emily, is that 0.6?
0.68.
0.68.
right.
Okay. The third waiver is section 4B5, special requirement to schedule of the dimensional requirements. That requirement is a minimum of 20 feet wide open and green space maintained along the entirety of the property line. And the requested waiver would allow less than 20 feet of open and green space maintained along the property line, specifically for pedestrian and vehicular connections, walkway and parking stalls abutting Lynch Field, walkway on the westerly side of the entrance drive abutting Bear Cove Park, and the Building 2 move-in loading area access drive. The fourth waiver, Section 4C5, General Intensity Provisions, which requires not more than one dwelling unit per any single lot, and the requested waiver is in fact to allow 220 dwelling units on a single lot, consistent with the proposed plans. The fifth and final waiver from the zoning regulations is Section 5A, off-street parking requirement, residential use, which requires 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, length of 18 feet with an overhang, 20 feet without the overhang, 24-foot aisle width, and the proposed waiver would relax that to 1.56 parking spaces per dwelling unit with a length of 18 feet without overhang within the garage, and a 23-foot aisle width within portions of the garage. And those are all 5 of the zoning waivers that have been requested, and then there's also a request for a waiver from the town's general bylaws, Article 10.34.A, Public Ways and Common Land. The removal of soil, loam, sand, or gravel from any land in the town not in public use to any location outside the town is prohibited, and the requested waiver is to allow soil, loam, sand, and gravel to be removed from the town as provided in the proposed project. Emily, am I right? This is the entire list of waivers.
That's it.
That's correct, yeah.
So that is down substantially from the initial list that was presented when this project first began. Joe, Al, any comments on this? I think we've discussed them.
No, I think we vetted this pretty thoroughly. I agree with you. It's a much shorter list than as first proposed, and I would commend the applicant for working with us to make it that so short here. So,
Here, here.
And the other thing that we've done is to make it clear that to the extent waivers are being requested, they are limited to the specific instances as shown on the plans. It's not just a blanket waiver. We have gone over these numerous times, and I'm comfortable that this is the minimum waivers that are required for the project. And now we have the more lengthy conditions. Emily, do you want to walk us through this, or how would you
Should
suggest?
we perhaps just
Just
zone
focus
in
on
on the
the
ones that have
changes?
changed?
Yeah.
Right, focus on the
Some
changes.
of which,
Yeah.
you know, the changes have already been discussed at the last
Correct.
hearing. They just hadn't been kind of codified yet. Others, there are more dramatic changes, and then there's a couple of open items that we'll need to discuss. So the first one is on page 2. There's a new general condition inserted. There was a comment during the last hearing, I believe, I think in response to the applicant's request to cap the overall cost for peer review in a number of instances, and a member had expressed interest in, I think there was general agreement that the cap was okay, but that if all of one line item wasn't used, that the surplus could be assigned to some other peer review expense. So this was an attempt to capture that idea, but perhaps could use some discussion.
I believe I was the instigator there. And the thought being that there have been, I think, reasonable estimates provided for costs of peer review. But the way I had read the conditions, that if, let's say, item 1 was 5,000 and item 2 was 6,000, and if item 1 only cost 2,000, the excess could not be spent on, the unused amount could not be spent on anything else, and if it turned out the second item was $500 more, it couldn't be used. The excess from the first one couldn't be used. So what I'm suggesting is that the amounts listed here are limited to peer review, but to the extent that there are funds from a specific item of peer review which are not used for that item, those funds can be used for other peer review items if needed. So there's clearly an overall cap as contemplated, but there can be a shifting of funds if required. That make sense?
Yes, I think it meets the intent of what we talked about,
Yeah.
which was a cap.
Yeah.
So, right.
We might want to think about removing from the other items, the limitations on the particular form of peer review, and instead inserting a total cap here, if that makes sense. So, I mean, we can talk about it when we read through those other ones later, but as I recall, it was left as, this cost may be up to, let's say, $15,000. But to put the up to 15,000, it assumes you would spend no more than 15,000. But if we're drawing down some other unused peer review line item and assigning it to that, it's a little contradictory, I think.
It is, but I like the idea of keeping those dollar amounts there because we've spent some time, the applicant has given us some input about what a reasonable cost would be.
Okay.
So it should be flagged. If the
Yeah.
cost was estimated at 10 and it's coming in at 25, it's not a blanket, let's go forward.
Okay.
I think to the extent that amounts are in excess of what is listed here, they should be, it should be brought to the attention of the zoning administrator, and then only if you determine that it's reasonable can we proceed.
Okay.
So if there's each item here, there's an item, whether it's $7,500, whatever it is, so that is what's allowed. If in fact it goes over, it's not an automatic go over, it needs to be reviewed by you.
So perhaps after, maybe utilized by the board for other peer review expenses as necessary and as determined by the zoning administrator?
Yep. And keeping in the language, such funds not spent for any, are not to be spent for any other use, and any excess funds will be returned to the applicant upon project completion.
Right, so that language had previously been included in the
each one.
final, and in particular in the final plan
Right.
one, and now this is intended to qualify all later references to peer review.
Yep.
So it was removed from the one. Would you like me to read that whole thing through? I don't know that we
Yeah.
did. Okay. So this new one says, the applicant shall provide peer review funds as specified by this decision. Any surplus funds remaining in a specific peer review fund may be utilized by the board for other peer review expenses as necessary and as determined by the zoning administrator. Such funds are not to be spent for any other use, and any excess funds will be returned to the applicant upon project completion.
Right. But where is it that there's language saying up to a certain amount of money as we go through?
It's in the traffic peer review and the sewer peer review requirements. In this.
So I think what we're saying is that language needs to be amended so that that is the threshold that it can be spent without your additional review, and beyond that, it would require your review.
Okay. So something along the lines of unless otherwise determined
Yep.
by the zoning administrator in accordance with this general. Okay. So that's the only change on page 2.
Yep.
Page 3, there are a couple items that were discussed at the last hearing. Under D, landscape plans, item 2. We updated the plan title for the Eastern Buffer Study. It's technically the Eastern Buffer Study with gate. And then item 3, I think that was intended to just make it read a little bit cleaner, had been recommended by the applicant, if I
Right.
So
recall
it says the
correctly.
note on sheet L100 entitled Selective Removal of Invasive Species Within Wooded Area to Remain, to be revised consistent with condition C12D.
That's it for page 3. Page 4, extra copies up here if anybody wants to read along.
Wait, 1 second before you go. I'm still just on page 3.
Sure.
Where we've got the lighting plans. There's no change in the lighting plan language.
Nope.
Okay.
So on page 4, we deleted the reference, well, that was previously item 3, discussing the pole and netting system.
Right.
Since based on the last discussion, it seemed there would just be a contribution to a solution that the town would come up with. So, and instead there is a new little 3 that says, if the existing private sewer system as defined in section B7 is to be utilized for the project, detailed specification of the grinder pumps to be installed by the applicant with sufficient capacity to service the existing private sewer system, including the flow of the project, has been inserted. So this is all under details that need to be included with the final plan submission.
Right.
So this is all part of, sort of, I'm just going to get the beginning of this.
Pre-construction conditions.
Modifications to project plans.
Right.
So there was a discussion at the last hearing that there had been a commitment made to install grinder pumps, but we realized late that the specifications were never filed, so.
So it needs to be with sufficient capacity to service the existing private sewer system, including the flow of the project. How is that to be determined?
So there, later in condition B7, it talks about peer review.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Under item, section F, architectural plans, subsection 2 was amended based on discussion at the last hearing to now read, no balconies shall be located on the north and east elevations of building 2 except as shown on approved plans. So, to the extent that some were proposed, and particularly in the courtyards,
Right, in the
facing that
interior
direction.
spaces, correct, yeah, in the interior, right.
But there's been no additional balconies on the approved
No,
plan?
that's correct. Okay.
Flip to page 4. There are no changes on page 5. At the very top of page 6, which is a continuation of condition little 3 on the prior page, we added the word stormwater between construction and general permit. That was Mr. Freeman's suggestion. And then there was some, looks like the next item, J, land transfer. These are just spacing and kind of grammatical issues.
Is under
There was-
2E on page 6?
Actually, before that, very
Oh, I'm
top
sorry,
page
right.
6, there's
Got
just
it.
quotations
Yep.
and a space deleted. So yeah, so then under 2E, general pre-construction conditions, the applicant had requested that we clarify that only supplemental construction fencing could be required by the zoning administrator, not any fencing for screening. On page 7, item G at the top of the page, we had mentioned this earlier. I've removed from the final plan peer review the statement that such funds are not to be spent for any other use, and any excess funds will be returned to the applicant upon project completion, to the general pre-construction, the general conditions section. So
Yep.
that's just a move as opposed to a deletion. That's it for page 7. Okay, on page 8, and item 7 has had some substantial changes based on the discussion at the last hearing. So this condition was referenced earlier in the final plan, the specification sheet for the grinder pump.
Right.
Was referring to this. So it reads, confirmation of sewer capacity. As of the date of issuance of this comprehensive permit, the existing building at the property indirectly accesses the existing public sewer system main within Route 3A by connection to a private sewer system, which is a defined term, existing private sewer system. Prior to the issuance of a building permit for the project, applicant must deliver to the board the following information, which shall be subject to peer review. also defined as sewer peer review, at the applicant's expense by a peer review engineer on behalf of the board. If applicant constructs the project utilizing the existing private sewer system, a report by a qualified licensed engineer confirming that the operating capacity of the existing sewer pump station is adequate to serve the existing project. Excuse me, the existing private sewer system. And then this is qualified, say that the applicant shall provide the zoning administrator with up to $5,000 for sewer peer review pursuant to this condition. And we earlier discussed adding language that would say unless otherwise determined necessary by the zoning administrator pursuant to,
Well, that language would be to allow other funds to be used for this
Yes.
purpose. Not,
unless additional funds are required necessary by the zoning administrator pursuant to general condition 7.
yes.
Okay. And then B, if applicant constructs the project utilizing an alternative sewer layout to the existing private sewer system, defined term alternative sewer layout, 1, engineered plans showing the alternative sewer layout from the project site to the public sewer system, and 2, reports by a qualified licensed engineer confirming the capacity of the alternative sewer layout to carry wastewater flow from the project site to the public sewer. That is qualified by the statement that the applicant shall provide to the zoning provide the zoning administrator with up to $15,000 for sewer peer review pursuant to this condition. Again, that will be updated to say, unless otherwise determined. And C, documentation evidencing the party or parties responsible for maintaining the sewer infrastructure extending from the project site to the public sewer system. And if the sole party responsible is the applicant, an operations and management plan governing maintenance of such system.
Okay, so let's talk about the sewer. Let me just address the easy issue first, which is, again, the funding. So the cap, the initial one, which was 5,000, or the second one for 15,000, those dollar amounts are not subject to revision by the zoning administrator. It's funds otherwise allocated to other peer reviews, if not used for those peer reviews, can be used in addition for these purposes. So we're not adjusting the dollar contributions.
Right.
Right, okay.
Well, so far to this point, we've identified 3 peer review amounts totaling $25,000. Okay. And I think this is pretty consistent with what we talked about and have talked about
The language that's here,
several times.
just going back to A, if the applicant constructs the project using the existing private sewer line, report confirming that the operating capacity of the existing sewer pump station is adequate. Are we comfortable that it's operating capacity as opposed to, it's the actual capacity, not,
Which is the operating as opposed to
right.
design. Yep.
Correct, yep.
Is it just the capacity of the pump station? Have we vetted out the capacity of the sewer line system? I know we talked about it. I just don't know where we left it.
We have had several peer review reports, as I recall, which have addressed.
So we don't need any language there that speaks to that.
I think there was a bit of dialogue at the last hearing, and what I recall you saying, Joe, is that unless there were a great number of additional units added upstream of the system, the the lines aren't likely to experience any degradation or.
This talks about the operating capacity. Is there any discussion about how long the system is likely to have that capacity? In other words, is there any sort of measure of degradation? So after 2 years, it could fail, 3 years, 5 years. Do we address degradation at all? Or it's just assumed that if it's got the capacity in year one, that's good enough for the project?
Right. So, I think it's assumed that it can support the project when the project goes live, and then it's up to whoever's responsible for the system to maintain it in such a
Right,
manner
that
that
becomes a
it.
maintenance issue for the operators of this system.
So do we want to include in here not only the capacity, but that there's a maintenance program in place to ensure that that capacity continues?
That, we intended to get to that, but I don't know if the language says it clearly enough in C. So C would is something that they need to submit, whether they're using the existing sewer layout or the alternative sewer layout. So that they would be providing evidence of who's responsible for maintaining it. And
No dancing allowed.
And then they would submit an O&M plan. So presumably there already is an O&M plan for the existing.
So it says
Sewer system.
documentation evidencing the party or parties responsible for maintaining the sewer infrastructure extending from the project site to the public sewer system, and if the sole party responsible is the applicant, an operations and management plan governing the maintenance of such system.
We could remove, and if the sole party responsible is the applicant, and just say, and an operations and management plan governing maintenance of such system.
Right.
So either way,
We should
There
be
should be a
getting that,
plan in
and is
place.
there any review of that maintenance plan?
yep, that's because it's, that's a good question. So we say, in the first paragraph, that prior to issuance, the applicant must deliver the following, which shall be subject to peer review.
Right, that's not the maintenance plan.
Well, we don't have a special line item for it,
Right.
but it would be covered by that general statement. We just haven't assigned a value to it. So, yeah. So you could assign an additional value to it, or somehow separate this to.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no
Fine.
reason to think that a failing system is going to be installed, but I think we've heard enough concern from the public that we should make sure that whatever is installed, it will be maintained so that it's adequate.
I mean, if at some point, if there's a failure of this system, whether it be overflows, backups into units, I think it's going to be pretty evident. And I think there's a procedure in place, particularly with the Board of Health in this case, where there would be some action that would need to be taken by the owner and operator of this system. I think that's existing, under state law. I mean, it's a sanitary issue. So.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, other than a standard operations and maintenance plan, if we need to go any further than relying on existing state sanitary code and any town bylaws.
Well, I think that we should make sure that the management plan is, at least going in, is reviewed and is deemed to be adequate.
I mean, there should be periodic inspections and things of that sort.
Yeah, I suspect this is
To
going to be
ensure there's not
rather.
infiltration
Okay,
or inflow.
great.
Right.
So can we add that into C?
Yep.
I mean, if there's significant occurrences or occurrences of overflow during rain events or after rain events with no increase in the number of units that are tying into the system,
Right.
that's pretty clear evidence that you got a problem. You got some leaks somewhere.
Yep.
So,
So similar language as the prior to, the applicant shall provide the zoning administrator with up to $500? Are we adding a new sum of money?
No, I
No.
think that the funds
Yeah.
otherwise allocated shall also be used for peer review of the operations and maintenance plan.
Right.
And I expect that that plan
Yeah.
is going to be fairly boilerplate, consistent with
Yeah.
the code.
Right.
But we want to make sure that that I is dotted.
So how do you
Or
want
we
to?
know there may be one that exists already.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
So how would you like to
So,
clarify that? I mean, it's in the beginning, but then I think having
Where's the beginning?
it's in the first paragraph, that prior to the issuance of the building permit, applicant must deliver to the board the following information,
right.
which is A, B, and C,
Okay,
which shall be subject to peer
right.
review. Two of the amounts are capped at a particular dollar amount.
Right.
You're right.
This one is not capped. I understood that the applicant had a concern about uncapped peer reviews.
Correct.
This would be one of those
Yeah,
uncapped
it's not-
ones.
I don't want to do an uncapped one.
Right.
You're right.
But I think the $5,000, which is in the first paragraph there, or item A, would certainly cover this under C. I mean,
Yeah.
it talks about this condition, which is 7, right? Not
So we could
just
almost
paragraph
take
A.
C language and insert it under A and B.
Right.
I'm thinking taking the language after A, which is, I would say something like, funds provided by the applicant pursuant to A and/or B above shall be applied for,
As necessary.
as necessary for
Right.
peer review.
Okay.
Right. Because there's a sum of $20,000 for these
Yeah.
two items. Right.
And in our discussions, we talked about alternatives. There'd be either using the existing or doing an alternative. Is there a hybrid that you could, some kind of an alternative as a backup, and you're planning on using the existing?
Inconceivably, they could connect at a different location,
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah, I
but-
just
But
don't.
we went through all of it, didn't we? Various times.
Yeah, we did, but we posed it as an either/or. And I just don't know technically if.
Well, it just strikes me as you wouldn't build both
I
unless you
can't.
had to.
Unless you had to.
And you'd only build the second because the first one either didn't work or failed or something, so it wasn't feasible to fix it.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I just think it's a very unlikely occurrence that both would be built. Plus financially, it's not a great move either, so.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, but the language here would allow them to do both if they so choose, and if
Correct.
they do, they would
Right.
just need to have the appropriate peer review.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
We're good with sewer?
Did we take out the language, and if the sole party responsible?
Yes.
I scratched
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
yeah. Yep. That makes sense.
So, but let's just, so if we've taken out that language, how does the applicant get us a plan if they're not the entity responsible for management?
Right.
They're a party to it, would they have access to?
Right, so essentially, we're saying as a condition of having a third party operate it, they need to make sure that this is provided. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we've really nailed this down as best as we can, so, yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Okay.
So, new
Sidewalks.
item 8. This is maintenance of sidewalk to bus stop. In lieu of accommodating a public school bus stop for its school-aged residents at the project site entrance that meets Hingham Public school criteria, thereby requiring such school-age residents to walk to a bus stop at the entrance to Lynch Field. The applicant shall contribute blank dollars to the town of Hingham to be applied by the town towards sidewalk, snow plow / maintenance equipment. Such contribution shall be made prior to the receipt of a building permit for the project. You'll see there's a comment that just spells out the options that were laid out on the table for the board. The DPW, as a reminder, had requested $80,000 to be applied towards snow removal equipment. The applicant had offered instead to either acquire and or contribute $25,000 toward equipment. And late in the last hearing, the council had provided the town administrator's office's recommendation that the board require no less than $40,000.
Yep. I think when we did the math last time,
Yeah.
the $40,000 was about in the middle of,
Right.
of the two.
Of the range, right.
Yep.
I was feeling Solomonic?
Yes.
Solomonic? Feeling like
You
Solomon.
were feeling like King Solomon, yes.
Like King Solomon.
And basically splitting the difference down to the 40,000,
Right.
or from the applicant's perspective, up to the 40,000. So that is 15,000 more than the applicant had proposed. It's 40,000 less than the initial request. I think, we got the information that substantiated the 25,000 of the applicant rather late. We didn't have it
Right.
in advance of the hearing. This is one of the things that we had talked about, whether or not it made sense to have an extension of the public hearing so we could get more input. The applicant did not want to go down that road. So I would be hesitant to go with anything less than the 40,000 that the
Right.
town had recommended.
Yeah, I think 40 is reasonable in this case, so.
So Emily, could you put in the 40,000 for that?
Okay. Item 9, mitigation of project impacts on adjacent town property. As the waivers requested by the applicant and granted by the zoning board in connection with this project result in the siting of certain project improvements in close proximity to existing town ball fields, the applicant shall contribute an amount not to exceed blank to the town of Hingham. Such funds shall be used by the town solely for the design and installation of backstops, pole netting systems, or like improvements to mitigate against potential adverse impacts on the operations or users of either the project or the town fields due to the close proximity of the activities on each site. Such contribution shall be made upon the later of A, delivery to the applicant and the zoning administrator by the Board of Selectmen or its designee of the cost of the mitigation as designed by an independent third party with experience in the design of such improvements. And B, applicant's application for a building permit for the project. And so you'll see the comment is that during the last hearing, the applicant had offered to contribute $25,000 toward this cost. The town had recommended an amount up to $50,000 since we didn't have sufficient time to get cost estimates or prepare more detailed information that should provide some cushion.
Right. So this is my recollection of another instance where we had talked about having more time to receive information, and again, the applicant did not want to hold the hearing open to allow them to submit or for others to submit the information. So what I would recommend, and tell me what you guys think, is that the initial, if it comes up to the $25,000 for the proposal, that proposal would be accepted. If the proposal winds up costing more than $25,000, it would be subject to review by the zoning administrator, and if the zoning administrator thought it was reasonable, then that $25,000 would be increased up to 50,000. So it's not a blanket requirement for 50,000. If the proposal was 30,000, then be an additional 5,000 more. But there would be no need for review by the zoning administrator if it was $25,000, just anything in excess of the 25.
I think if that's worded properly, I'm comfortable with that. 50,000 seems like a big number to
It
me
does.
for this.
I agree.
I don't have any information on which to base this, but it just doesn't feel like it should cost that much. It really shouldn't.
That's in part why we wanted that.
Right.
this
I think
element.
actually this was the item that I was feeling like Solomon on. Split the difference, but I think an initial, 25,000 contribution, and then if reasonable costs exceed that amount, then that would be subject to review by the zoning administrator.
Yeah, that works. We just don't have enough information on what
Right,
this thing looks like, or how much of it there is and
right.
where it's located.
So let's come up with wording. Basically, it's shall contribute an amount not to exceed $25,000, or if the zoning administrator deems it necessary and appropriate, an amount up to 50,000. Is that,
Well, it's not to exceed them, it's,
well, oh, the board will note the entrance of Town Real Estate Council, Susan Murphy, who's returned from Spain to join us.
Yeah, by way of Timbuktu.
Good to see you.
Welcome. Hola.
Yes, Al,
what happened?
wherever you're
Chair?
comfortable. So Al, what you're saying is an amount shall contribute an amount of $25,000.
Right, of 25.
And if deemed appropriate by the zoning administrator, an additional amount not to exceed an additional 25.
Yeah.
Susan, we are on page 9,
For reasonable costs.
and we're
of
down
such
to...
equipment, Such mitigation.
Yes. Number 8, we were at the $40,000. And number 9, we're now discussing how that should be drafted. So Emily, did you get that change for,
Let me read it back, because I'm not sure that I did. So,
just beginning that line, shall contribute an amount?
shall contribute an amount of $25,000, or an amount not to exceed an additional $25,000.
Not an or, and, if deemed reasonable by...
And.
Right.
If deemed reasonable by the zoning administrator, an amount not to exceed.
An additional amount not to
additional
exceed
amount.
$25,000.
Okay.
And we're continuing here, that, the funds shall be used solely for the design and installation of backstops, pole netting, and the like.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Good.
Very Solomon-esque, how's that?
Solomon-esque.
Solomonian.
Solomonian?
I know there's
Okay.
there's got to be a proper
All right.
form for that word. If I was a more educated man, I'd figure it out, but.
So, the very bottom of page 9, C3, it
Burials,
regards
yeah.
the unmarked burial lot. The board had asked that we add language at the top of page 10 that requires the applicant to simultaneously notify the zoning administrator if any unmarked burial grades are located during construction.
So the normal protocols would not include the zoning administrator?
No.
So we're
Not
adding that in?
necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
no changes on page 11 or 12.
Yep. 13.
So on page 13, number 4, confirmation of private sewer improvements, now reads, if the applicant utilizes the existing private sewer system, which was defined earlier, as currently proposed in the approved plan, then prior to issuance of any certificate of occupancy, the applicant shall provide documentation certifying that the project sewer improvements have been completed, including installation of the grinder pump per the specification required in condition B1E3. So in the final plans earlier, we had required that the specifications be submitted.
So this applies if they are using the existing private sewer system.
That's correct. Yep.
So if they don't and they use an alternative, are we also asking them to provide documentation certifying that that alternative has been completed?
No.
Don't we want to do that?
Right.
Well, they would,
Well, I think we do.
they would need to obtain the proper
yeah, as a
permits
matter
or
of-
approvals to connect to that alternative
And
system.
to get an occupancy permit.
Right, but
So this was more to kind of belt and suspenders, because we didn't have the specifications about the grinder pump, but they've made the commitment on the record to
And the
just make
town nor the
sure.
state has
Yep,
no
okay.
oversight over the private sewer system.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, that's it for page 13.
Well, so just getting back, so if they're doing their alternative sewer system, what confirmation are we getting?
They usually submit as-built plans. Now, let's say they are putting a new connection in
Right.
Beal Street going, down to 3A. That would require coordination with the town.
Correct.
I can't conceive of any other connection that wouldn't be public.
Don't you have the 85% requirements built in here, that they have to
Right.
prove, before they can get more than 85% of their building, of their certificates of occupancy,
They have to show that
they
all,
have to
yeah.
have the certification that all of the improvements have been
Correct.
constructed. So I think that, I mean, this might, like
Yeah.
Emily said, be belt and suspenders, because.
Well, but this
we
is,
This is
have a
before
requirement.
any.
this kicks
Oh,
in
this one is before.
before any
Correct.
certificate of occupancy. So I don't, to put it differently, is there a reason not to include a provision saying if the applicant utilizes the alternative sewer layout,
Yep.
then prior to issuance of any certificate of occupancy, the applicant shall provide documentation certifying that such improvements have been completed in accordance with the approved plans.
How about how about submit a copy of the approved permit, which approves that connection? I'm assuming that there would be a sewer connection permit, perhaps a sewer extension permit from DEP,
They're,
which would, by, necessity, include an assessment of the existing capacity for that system.
right. But the capacity should all be reviewed prior to the building permit issuance. I don't think there's any harm in including a condition, but you can't get an occupancy permit unless there is a working sewer system.
Right.
The reason why there was particular attention paid to the grinder pump is that it's an existing issue with the system that the applicant committed to resolving. And it's not touching our infrastructure, so we
Right.
wouldn't necessarily be.
I agree, but I
Otherwise-
just think the interests of the neighbors, to the extent there are issues, they want it flagged early.
Yep.
And I think this is one way of making that happen.
Okay. So this would be a new condition, because it wouldn't necessarily be a private sewer improvements?
Well, you
Just do additional language.
What I would do is just have a 4A and a 4B. 4A, confirmation of private sewer improvements, and then 4B, confirmation of, what do we call it?
Alternative?
Alternative sewer.
of alternative sewer layout is the defined term.
But can't you just,
No, you can't, because the grinder doesn't apply to the
Right.
alternative.
well, let's see, how many numbers do we have?
I just do 4A is 4 can be confirmation of sewer improvements, then A,
Yep.
confirmation of the private, and then B,
Confirmation of alternative.
yeah, confirmation of alternative.
Yep. Mhm. And then language is appropriate.
Yeah.
Yep.
Excluding the grinder pump. Okay.
And I think that's it on page 13?
On the top of page 14, there was a proposed condition deleted related to
Right.
ball field protection in favor of one that we discussed
Right.
just a moment ago. The same goes for E2, the condition to remove snow from the
There
sidewalk.
was a change.
Oh, sorry, yes, and thank you for pointing that out, because this, we've talked about a little bit. So E1, this is under Beal Street, Sergeant William B. Terry Drive, traffic signal timing improvements. There was a requirement for peer review, and the applicant had requested that such expense shall not exceed $5,000. So we had earlier discussed adding language that says unless additional funds are available and determined necessary
By the zoning.
by the zoning administrator in
Yep.
accordance with general condition 7.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Now, E2, snow removal on the part of the applicant has been deleted in lieu of a financial contribution earlier discussed. So there's some subsequent renumbering because of the deletion. But that is it
And that's it?
for the rest of the
That's it.
document.
Much shorter than the last time we did that?
Yes. Yes. And for the record, I would commend the zoning administrator for her diligence and effort in putting this together. It is not easy, and I know Susan Murphy
Yes.
contributed mightily, so we
Town's real
thank
estate attorney as well.
thank you
Correct.
as well. This has been not a trivial project, so we appreciate it.
For Susan's sake, muchas gracias.
Nada.
And Emily, do we have now, I believe the answer is yes, but we have a final set of of plans that the applicant has provided us as the definitive plan set?
Correct. Yep, with the exception of the conditions that would require changes to those. They're dated April 11th.
Okay. Okay, so I think we've got the meat, and now we need to decide if we want to
Right, right.
allow the project to move forward
Right.
with these conditions and
Right.
waivers.
Well, we've certainly had peer review on this project as thorough as any that I can recall being involved in.
And you have longevity that beats all of us.
I've been involved in a few over 27 years. It's a big step for the town, big step for the board, to finally reach an uncontested 10%. I mean, I won't go into, everyone's well aware of the machinations that this town has gone through, like, over the years. On a personal note, I'm a little disappointed in the way the process played out at the end. I would have loved to have seen the distribution of these projects a little more equitably throughout the town, but so be it. That's the way it is. So I think as I leave the board, I'm going to continue to advocate for similar type projects throughout town, in other areas of town, because I think as a matter of equity, that's an important thing to do here. So on a personal note, I want to commend the applicant. I think it's been very responsive to the board's concerns and requests. Really reached out a lot to the neighbors, and I would urge you to continue to make every effort to mitigate the impacts of the project. Maybe tweak the design to make it a little more compatible as we go forward into final plans. And I'm sure that you'll make every effort to do that. So
you think, given the way it's evolved and the conditions that we're imposing, that it makes sense to move forward?
I think it makes sense to move forward. Still concerned we're putting a little too much in one corner of town, but the infrastructure, such as it is probably adequate to handle that. I think ultimately this would be a positive step. So I'm comfortable voting to approve the project.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, with Joe.
Yeah.
You know, it is unfortunate that it all seemed to condense it. You know, the 40Bs found their way to the shipyard and Beal Street and North Hingham, but
And South Hingham,
well, yeah.
on the Weymouth lines.
Good point.
Oh, Linda Pond, yeah.
Well, yeah,
Right.
but as of late, this is sort of
Right.
a intense.
That's how things work, so.
That's how things work. So
Right.
I agree. So
I mean, I think one of the advantages of having large projects on the end of town is that quick access out of town, and it
Right.
puts less stress on the town's infrastructure. If it was in the heart, going through all the roads
yep.
versus easy access to 3A or to
But
Route 3.
it's a very home rule, New England type of occurrence. It happens a lot with a lot of big projects,
Yeah,
not just housing projects, but regional malls back in the day, et cetera. So,
yeah.
but in this case, it's clearly the infrastructure that drives this project.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's right.
yep.
Emily, do you have any thoughts? Yeah, this has not been an easy project, I think, for any member of the board to consider. It has a lot of twists and turns. And ultimately, I think, Joe, you summed it up, that there is some real benefit to the town in reaching an uncontested
Right.
threshold. This board has consistently maintained the view, position that we
Correct.
have achieved the 10%. And the town has expended a fair amount of town funds
Correct.
in litigation. Even in projects where we have taken the view that we've reached the 10%, the board has decided that those projects have merit, and we've elected to move forward.
Correct.
So this would be in keeping with that. So let us get a motion on the table. We can have someone make it, or I can ask to receive it. I will, do you want to?
You want me to make it?
Yeah.
I'll be willing to make it, okay. So this motion's in two parts. First part will be certain findings to be made by the board, and the second part will concern the grant of the comprehensive permit. So under findings, the board shall make the following three findings. The first finding, that pursuant to documents that are currently in the record, the grounds have been met to satisfy the requirements of 760 CMR 56.031, which is referred to as the 40B Safe Harbor Regulations. The board expressly references the following three documents. First is correspondence dated September 30th, 2016, on behalf of the Zoning Board of Appeals to Broadstone, Bear Cove Alliance LLC, the applicant, known as the ZBA Safe Harbor Letter. Second is correspondence dated October 27th, 2016, on behalf of the applicant to the Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD, withdrawing its opposition to the ZBA Safe Harbor Letter. And correspondence dated October 27th, 2016, from the applicant to the Zoning Board of Appeals, acknowledging that the applicant's withdrawal of opposition precludes it from appealing any denial or imposition of economic or acceptable conditions. The second finding, that pursuant to the last paragraph of 760 CMR 56.031, the board may, at its sole discretion, elect to approve a comprehensive permit, even though the town qualifies for the 40B safe harbor. And the third finding, that pursuant to Chapter 40B, Sections 20 through 23, and the regulations promulgated thereunder, after extensive public hearings and evaluation of the testimony and documents submitted by the applicant, peer review engineers, neighbors, and town officials, the application may be approved, subject to certain conditions that are necessary and proper to protect the health and safety of the occupants of the proposed project, to protect the health and safety of the residents of the town of Hingham, to protect the natural environment, to protect better site and building design in relation to the surroundings and municipal and regional planning, and to preserve open spaces.
So those are the three findings?
Those are the three findings.
And then with that, what is,
And with the grant of the comprehensive permit, in light of such finding, the board resolves to grant the comprehensive permit for the project shown on the project plans as described in Attachment A, subject to the comprehensive permit conditions set forth in Attachment B, together with the waivers set forth in Attachment C, which attachments are incorporated by reference into this motion.
we've got a motion which includes the findings as well as the grant of comprehensive permit. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It is unanimous. This hearing is now closed.
Just want to thank everyone for your participation, and thank you very much.
I will accept a motion to close the hearing and to adjourn the hearing.
So moved.
A second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are finished.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.